morning, sports fans. Welcome to this November 25th edition of the Courier Paperboyz. I'm Doug Newhoff. I'm joined this morning by, to my far left, Jim Sullivan, immediate left, Jim Nelson, and to my right, Nick Pateros. It was quite a weekend of sports around the state of Iowa, starting, I guess, in Ames, where the Cyclones decided it was time to make a change with their head football coach. Paul Rhoads has been fired. I think Iowa State's making a big mistake here. I'm not sure they're going to find anybody who is better suited for that job than Paul Rhoads. I've said it before, and I stand by that. His players took care of their business off the field. They did okay in the classroom. I don't think they got in a lot of trouble with the law down there. They were competitive with the best teams in the Big 12. They went to 3 bowl games, I believe, in 6 years.
3 in the first 4. 3 in the first 4.
And 3 of the last, all right, so 3 out of 7 years total,
Right.
Something like that. I mean, that's a pretty good record. How much more is it realistic to expect from a program that's based in the Midwest and trying to play in a Southern league like the Big 12?
Well, Jamie Pollard didn't want to get into too many specifics on that yesterday when he met with the media. The rationale given for firing Paul Rhoads is basically he wasn't winning enough games and he wasn't trending in the right direction, all of which is true. Excuse me. He flatly rejected the notion that the Kansas State disaster had anything to do with it, although it's hard to believe that if Iowa State had won that game, we would have had that press conference on Monday. It just wouldn't have flown, I don't think. He also, in a way, embraced the notion that it's a difficult job at Iowa State. Said, well, we're looking for a guy who can embrace that challenge. We want someone who understands that it's tough here, but as he pointed out, it's tough at Alabama, tough somewhere else. All well and good, but the question is, who's it going to be? Who's going to be the guy that comes in there and puts Iowa State where it thinks it should be and where it wants to be? And if you look at it, over the last 30 years, they've tried everything. They tried a small college coach in Jim Kreiner. That didn't work. They tried a proven coach from the Pac-10, as it was, in Jim Walden. Well, that didn't really work for over the long haul. They tried an Iowa native in Dan McCarney. That worked, sort of. And then he found himself on the street in a resignation situation. They tried the hot assistant Gene Chiswick. He lasted a grand total of 2 years and 5 victories. Then they tried the Iowa guy again, who was a first-time head coach, experienced defensive coordinator, good reputation, Paul Rhoads. That didn't work. So where do you go if you're Iowa State? Where do you turn? There's been some speculation about the guy at Navy who runs a different system. There's been all sorts of other names thrown out there, some with Iowa ties, some without. Pollard has suggested he does not need necessarily a guy with both those Iowa ties. He's more interested in the resume. So I don't know. And to complicate all of it, there are something like 13 FBS jobs open out there.
Right. Ranging
from Missouri to South Carolina to Central Florida. It's complicated, and Pollard seems to think he's going to get it done quickly. Well, good luck.
Before we get into who may be the hot candidates out there, why do you think it was important to make this announcement now? What's the difference, I guess, in doing it Sunday as opposed to waiting until after the West Virginia game?
Pollard gave a couple different reasons. One, he thought it was best to have everyone on campus so they could deal with it right now. This is a Thanksgiving week. The players will be gone soon enough next week. Let's say he had waited till after the West Virginia game. The players would be gone. The team would be scattered, in essence, because they weren't playing a bowl game. The assistant coaches would be scattered because they would be out recruiting. His rationale was, or at least the rationale he gave to the media, that since everyone is still on campus this week, you get them there, you explain to them what the situation is, and then you move on. It also, and he was very candid about this part, it gives them a head start towards the next guy. Now, how much good that'll do, who knows? And he also said, finally, that they thought it was an appropriate way to handle it with Paul Rhoads for some of the same reasons, and he thought it'd be good to give him one more game as a head coach, even though he's a lame duck. So take those reasons for what you will, but that's why Pollard decided to do it this time as opposed to later. And there was some precedent for it. If you remember when Dan McCarney left or resigned or whatever it was, that situation was, he did it 2 weeks before the regular season was over, and then McCarney coached in 2 games at the end of the regular season at Colorado and home with Missouri. So there's some precedent for it, but maybe there was no real good way to do this.
The other thing that comes to mind is it tells me a lot that Iowa State is willing to or able to come up with a $4.5 million buyout to get rid of Paul Rhoads at this point. I mean, it makes me think that there was some outside influence, maybe at work here as well, as the fact that they didn't win enough games to satisfy Jamie Pollard.
There are always rumors floating about, and without getting into names and who did what for whom, there have been things floating around out there about how Booster A is as at University B talking to Coach C
Sure.
about a job that hasn't been open yet. And how much truth there is that I don't know. It's not beyond the realm of possibility. In fact, that's fairly tame behavior compared to what you hear about schools like Auburn and so on.
Yeah, LSU, they're talking $15 to $20 million buyout for Les Miles that the boosters are already ready to pony up. So
Yeah. Jimmy Pollard didn't seem too worried about the financial end of it. He said they're in pretty good shape to handle this. He thinks they can be competitive financially in terms of package to lure the coach that they want. We'll see about that part.
It's interesting if we be talking about this, if they hold on to two second half leads against Oklahoma State.
Sure, if they beat
Because
Oklahoma State and Iowa, I mean, it's a different.
Yeah.
we're
Yeah.
talking
Or
about a
in these
different
last
scenario.
two, they're playing for a bowl game this Saturday. And boy, they'd be probably talking contract extension.
Well, then Pollard, and so someone asked him about that flatly. If Iowa State had beaten Kansas State, would we be here now? And he said, well, that's a hypothetical. I'm not going to deal with that. So what does that tell you? I mean, I think that's basically an admission that he probably wouldn't, in a way. So, there's a lot of what ifs out there, but there were a lot of what ifs with Dan McCarney. There were a lot of what ifs with Jim Walden. At a certain point, I guess, from Jamie Pollard's perspective, you have to look at the cold hard record, and in his mind, at least, the cold hard record was not good enough.
Well, we've had 3 years without a bowl game, but I'll go back to the 3 years that they did go to bowl games. In 2 of those years, they were, I think, 6-6. Is that right?
Mhm.
7-6 the first year, and then like 6-7, but at 500 or slightly above at the end of the regular season.
Right, and not going to major big marquee bowl games. I mean, barely getting into lower tier bowl games. That to me, the difference between getting into those and not is a play here or a play there during your regular season. So, I don't know that they played any worse in the last couple of years than they did those years. They just may have gotten a better break. I mean, Nebraska fumbled 5 times and lost 3 interceptions in a game one of those years that Iowa State won. So
plus you go from playing in that Big 12 North that had Colorado, Kansas State, Nebraska, Missouri to playing a round robin schedule in the Big 12. That's a lot tougher competition there.
That's
year
what
in
I
and
was
year out.
going to make a point. Is now they got 9 conference games. They can't schedule another win in the
the
preseason.
landscape has changed a little bit.
If they had the divisions, that would be. You think they would have one? They'd have one more non-conference game.
Interesting you should bring that up because Paul Rhoads brought that up. Someone asked him what he thought Iowa State needed to succeed. One thing he said was he would like the AD to endorse or push harder for getting parents on campus with paid visits or help defray expenses. He said once these parents get on campus, they're much more likely to go to Iowa State as opposed to somewhere else because they like the culture and so on. And the other thing he mentioned was the structure, the schedule, and specifically the structure of the Big 12 now. The last time Iowa State won as many as 4 conference games was 2005. At that point, there were 2 divisions. Colorado was still in the league, Missouri was still in the league, Nebraska was still in the league, all teams Iowa State could compete with. Now it's a 9-game round robin, and every year they're playing Texas, every year they're playing Baylor, every year they're playing Oklahoma State, and those programs are traditionally tough, and that's something that Iowa State did not have to deal with 10, 12 years ago.
The best scenario for Iowa State would be to move over to the Big Ten.
Well, I wondered about that, but apparently the Big Ten didn't want that.
Yeah, right.
And if you're Iowa State, you're stuck in a way because you're in a Power 5 conference now, and you're competitive in other sports, women's basketball, men's basketball, especially wrestling and so on, but they're having a tough time in football. And if you move for the sake of being competitive in football, where do you go? Who else is going to take you? There aren't that many good options out there. So they're between a rock and a hard place when it comes to the gridiron.
Let's kick around some of the potential candidates that are out there. Like you mentioned, Sully, it's really hard to get your arms wrapped around what exactly they want. Do they want an offensive coordinator with some Big 12 experience and some ties to some of the programs like Baylor and TCU? Do they want a guy who's got some Iowa ties, some Iowa connections? Do they want a big name that their fan base and their donors will immediately get behind and so forth? No matter what, I think they've committed themselves to at least 2 or 3 more years of mediocrity while whoever they bring in tries to get his program in place and his players in place. So that is what it is. But let's talk about some of the guys who are out there. I'll throw out some names. You guys tell me why they are or aren't a good fit. Tom Herman's a hot commodity.
Not coming. I don't think anyone out there thinks
I
he's
think
coming.
Houston just ponied up some extra money to.
If he's going anywhere, he's going up the ladder a little bit in a Power 5 program.
Scott Frost.
I heard that when anyone out there, Oregon's offensive coordinator.
Right.
He's got some Iowa ties.
Nebraska graduate, coached at Northern Iowa for a little bit. He's kind of been biding his time as Oregon's offensive coordinator, waiting for the right position. But I know Scott a little bit on a personal level from his time here. I'm not sure that he would jump into a job at Iowa State.
I agree. I think that's a long shot. I think he's waiting for, Oregon's a little bit off this year, a little bit now. He might be waiting for that level of a job, I would think.
There's a guy named Chad Morris, former Clemson coordinator, who's now the head coach at SMU. I believe he just made that move last year or the year before, so he hasn't been at SMU very long. But is that the type of thing where a guy would go to a job like SMU and then jump to a job like Iowa State?
I could see that. SMU, since the death penalty era, that's almost 30 years ago, has had a very tough time building a winning program. They've been to a couple bowl games, but they've really struggled to get to that level they were at in the 70s and early 80s. So he may see, and I'm only speculating here, Iowa State is a more stable situation, a situation with more potential growth, and he may like the talent that's already on the table there in terms of Lazard, Lanning, Mike Warren, and so on.
And I think he turned like a winless SMU program into just a 3-loss season. So he's done a good job there, and you'd think that'd be a step up.
You wonder how many bridges coaches burn though when they take a job at an SMU and stay there for 1 year and then take the next best thing that comes along long term. I mean, does that come into play? And another guy who falls into that category is Philip Montgomery. He's the head coach at Tulsa. He was the former Baylor offensive guru. Tulsa averaged like 511 yards this year, so he's the type of offensive mind I think that would be a good fit in the Big 12, but he's only been at Tulsa for a year or so, and does he make that kind of a jump to Iowa State?
It's been done before. I think you're right. I think you do acquire a sort of reputation when you do that, but some guys have been willing to run that risk.
I tell you, I think Iowa State job you look at the history, they haven't been very successful, but what they've done in the last 5 years with facilities, what they've got left in the program, I think they've got some pieces that could be fairly successful next year. Challenge for a bowl game.
Sure.
I think it's an attractive job. The guy comes in, the facilities are there. What they've done with the new football facility, that's like 3 years old. That's attractive. What they've done to the stadium this past year, bowling it in, they've got some, there's some things to sell the potential recruits, and I think they've got pieces in place where maybe one of these hot commodities come in and make himself a bigger hot commodity, but I might be looking at that.
I think they've already sold what they've got to the best recruits that they can sell it to. I think they have a lot of talent in that program right now, and it's still not good enough to compete at the top level of the Big 12. From my perspective, it's about as good as it's going to get.
Here's one more, and it's a name without throwing out a name. The head coach in Navy. There was some.
I can't remember how you pronounce that.
Yeah, it's not an easy one to pronounce. Ken.
Coach Ken.
Coach Ken, we'll call
Coach
him.
Ken.
Coach Ken at Navy runs a triple option system. And somewhere, I don't remember which college football writer it was who reported this, but he said that Jamie Pollard has been interested in Coach Ken. And the thinking is that someone like that who runs a sort of out-of-box offense, at least out-of-box in terms of the Big 12, would be a good fit at Iowa State because he'd be difficult to prepare for, and so on and so on and so on. Sort of like in a different way Mike Leach was when he first got to Texas Tech. Okay, that's nice, but then what do you do with your quarterback, your people who don't necessarily fit that system? And it goes back to what you said, Doug. You're looking then at a few years where you're out of system, playing with players out of system, and you're going to struggle.
Yeah, you have a guy like Alan Lazard. I don't think he'd be too thrilled about that type of.
Yeah,
I wouldn't think so.
But you got to remember, Calvin Johnson played at Georgia Tech, and they ran the triple option with Paul Johnson too. He was pretty good.
It takes a while to get that in place and to get the right people to run that. That would be delaying your rebuilding, quote unquote, by another year or so.
But Sully brings up a good point. It's, do you try to keep up with the Joneses there in the Big 12 and go high-powered offense, or do you try to do something different, maybe go to more of a rushing attack, time of possession type offense, and give teams something else to look at?
How about Doug Nussmeier, the offensive coordinator at Florida?
I think I saw him play quarterback for a while.
Yeah,
I don't know when the Unidome.
He has ties here, just for the Unidome. It's another intriguing name. It's a guy that I think he also has NFL assistant coaching experience. Again, you wonder with a guy like that, is he willing to go to Iowa State, for the perceived reasons that it's a coaching, despite the reputation it has, or is he willing to go there for 3 to 5 years, build a resume, and leave? If that is his plan, his agenda, would Iowa State want a guy like that? I mean, you kind of get in a cycle, and we saw it to some degree with Gene Chizik, where you recruit, you bring in the hot commodity, and he leaves. Is that good for the program? I think that's a question they would have to consider seriously before hiring a guy like that.
There are a couple of guys in the Mid-American Conference who I think will be on Iowa State's list. Dino Babbers at Bowling Green, they're averaging like 400 and some yards of passing per game. And I think he's a Art Briles disciple from down at Baylor, so he's got some ties and some connections. And then I've heard some talk about the Northern Illinois coach too, Rod Carey. He's put together a pretty good offense over there too.
That would be, to me, that would be a more attractive option, going with a coach out of that conference. The Mid-American is pretty good football now. They've had some success knocking off teams at the Power 5 level. They've built their profile through some innovative, if you want to call it that, scheduling, getting themselves on ESPN. It's a good offensive league, I think. So I could see where they'd want to do that, and possibly a coach out of that league were willing to plant roots in an Iowa State as opposed to a guy like a Doug Nessler.
I think another school would be Toledo. I think they have like a 34-year-old head
Yeah.
coach, beat Iowa State earlier this season, kind of a young guy, might be interesting too.
It's interesting. Northern Illinois is going to start getting mad at all these teams hiring all their coaches. I mean, Jerry Kill. I can't think of all the names, but every time they get to BCS Bowl or in contention, they lose their coach.
A couple other guys who are out there. Justin Fuente at Memphis has put together a pretty good season and a pretty good program. I heard you mention this morning Matt Wells at Utah State. I mean, he's held in pretty high regard in a lot of coaching circles. And another guy is Lincoln Riley, who's the offensive coordinator, I believe, at Oklahoma. So he's got his feet firmly in the Big 12 and knows what it takes to win at that level. A lot of candidates out there. I think a lot of it will come back to who has a big enough personality to take on a job like Iowa State, sell the boosters, sell the fans, and sell the recruits.
One more note along those lines, and it's interesting you bring up personality. Paul Rhoads several times, or not Paul Rhoads, Jamie Pollard several times yesterday mentioned fitting in with the culture. And when someone asked him what that meant, he said, well, we're a wholesome, sincere, basically Iowa nice, I think is what he was trying to say. And he needs someone, he thinks he needs someone that'll fit into that culture well, that'll treat people with respect and so on. That said, you also want a guy that has a dynamic personality, which is what Paul Rhoads did have, and I think people were attracted to that. It's what McCarney had, and I think people are still attracted to that with him. So yeah, I think those are things to consider. Is the guy going to fit, and can he be a salesman?
And we come back to where we started. You can line all these guys up, put them on a chalkboard, talk each one of them to death, and I'll come back to the same thing. I still think they already had the best guy for this job. They should have kept Paul Rhoads, and I think they're going to be sorry they didn't over the next 4 or 5 or 10 years.
$4.6 million question.
Elsewhere in college football, let's move over to Iowa City. The Hawkeyes are 11-0 now. They're up to number 3 in the national polls, knocking on the door of that college football playoff. They're having a huge season. They just continue to find ways to win. Nebraska stands in their way this week. They play over there Friday. What do you guys think about this game? And do the Hawkeyes get to 12-0?
It's a tough matchup. Nebraska is coming off a bye. Iowa will be playing on short rest, going to Lincoln. Nebraska's trying to get into a bowl game. They need a win to get into a bowl game probably. So, Iowa's going to have a lot of things going against it, and I think it'll be a very big challenge. But, how exciting is this for the Iowa football program? You're looking at this point in the season. Now they're really playing to try to get themselves in a position to contend for a national title. And who would have ever imagined that heading into this season?
A little bit of distraction over there in Lincoln. Apparently the quarterback and a couple other players live in a house with some other people, and there was a sexual assault charge or report or whatever investigation going on there. So I don't think we all know how that's going to shake out, but it doesn't sound like the football players were part of the assault. It was whoever else was living there. So I presume that they're clear to play, and everybody will be at full strength for that game.
I was at a meeting the other day and I heard a football coach say, well, if any team is schizophrenic enough to do this to Iowa, it would be Nebraska. And I don't know that in Cornhusker history, recent history, certainly we've had a team as erratic and inconsistent and unpredictable as Nebraska. Here's a team that gets the doors blown off by Purdue not that long ago. Then it turns around and beats Michigan State, albeit on some iffy calls at the end of the game, but they're in the game and they win it. Which team is going to show up against Iowa? Who knows? It could be the good Huskers, it could be the bad Huskers. They have some players. Certainly Tommy Armstrong, the quarterback, is good. They have a pretty potent passing attack. They have let's see, I think they're pretty, their defense is a little questionable, but they have some pieces. And this has now become, as I said a couple weeks ago, a rivalry game just because of what's on the line here. And I think this might be the first time all year that Iowa really feels the moment, feels the pressure, that they know what's ahead of them, it's a thin reach, now can they go get it? There's no indication that they'll have trouble with that, but still I think from an emotional standpoint, this will be a pretty meaningful test for them.
Yeah, I think there's 2 points I'm thinking. I'm going to use an analogy Coach Farley used yesterday when they were talking about, he's talking about how you and I made their run to get to, this Southern Illinois game, and how to do all that work and they get to the last game, we weren't, there was nothing going to stop us from finishing. I think Iowa's done all this work to get 11-0. They're going to go and, I think their thought process is, and there's nothing going to stop us to finish this. And the other 2.2 is to go the opposite direction is, I think we've seen some cracks a little bit in their defense the last 2 weeks, and you wonder now whether the injuries are starting to mount up or the nicks and dings. Minnesota just at times picked them apart, and then Purdue throws in their backup quarterback and causes some issue, or makes it interesting for a while. So you wonder what's going on there. But I see Iowa going in and their thought process is, hey, this is close. We're gonna finish the job.
I hope you're right. I mean, that would silence their critics who keep complaining that they haven't played a tough enough schedule. But you go to Nebraska and win, and with everything that would be on the line, that'd be a really big win for them. Speaking of UNI, they won their fifth in a row last week. Beat Southern Illinois. They got into the FCS playoffs, as we all hoped and expected they would, by finishing so strong. They host Eastern Illinois on Saturday afternoon. It's a good regional matchup. They haven't played for a while, but they do have a little bit of history from way back in the day, probably when I was covering the beat. Tony Romo was the quarterback at Eastern Illinois, and they've got some tradition there offensively through the years. Nellie, you probably have looked at this game in depth. Tell us a little bit more.
Well, it's an intriguing thing. Eastern is it's going to be I think it's one of the best matchups in the first round. You look at Eastern's schedule; they lost their first 3 games. One of them was the 9-2 Northwestern, and then they lost to Jacksonville State in and then after they lost those three, they went 7-1, and their one loss was Jacksonville State, who's the top overall seed, and that was a 24-3 game. So they've been playing really well. And the other 3 losses, Northwestern, the other 2 teams made the playoffs. They lost to West Illinois right off the get-go, I think 33-5, and then they took Illinois State to double overtime. So you look at their 4 losses; those are 4 pretty good teams they lost to. And it's going to be a tough game. I think Coach Farley, their offense is going to be similar to Southern Illinois, and he referred to their quarterback as bigger than Aaron Bailey, which is hard to think, but bigger, similar stuff. They like to run the ball, and defensively they're going to bring pressure all over the place, and they're going to try to cause some confusion in UNI's offense. So, but it's I think it sets up well for UNI. You get a win, you get to go to Portland State. And then maybe a potential return trip to the Fargo Dome.
We're just taking this one game at a time.
I'm getting all that coach speak. I'm the dreamer.
Eastern Illinois first. Be a tough game and a good matchup. The Ohio Valley, I don't think top to bottom is comparable to the Missouri Valley, at least this season. But you have to think that the team that wins the Ohio Valley is at least as good as some of the teams in the Missouri Valley. So should be a good matchup, and I think UNI is fortunate they'll be playing it at home. Never seem to get a big crowd for Thanksgiving, but hopefully they'll get 7,000, 8,000, 9,000 people in there that can get behind the Purple Panthers, who will be playing the Blue Panthers, so that'll be a little confusing.
We shouldn't refer them to the Blue Panthers. I already got a couple of nasty emails from Eastern Illinois supporters who said they've never been called the Blue Panthers.
Well, they are now.
But tickets go on sale to the general public tomorrow at Colin McDonough called over from the United. Tickets go on sale tomorrow at the UNI ticket office for $10 for everybody tomorrow morning or Wednesday morning.
If you look at that level of live entertainment, $10, that's a really a great deal too. If you're around in the area, I mean, no reason not to check out something like that.
And what a better place to watch a football game in
November.
the end of November than the Unidome. So yeah, hopefully the community gets out and supports this team and roots them on here Saturday. Interesting thing with the FCS playoffs too. The committee put 5 Missouri Valley football teams in the bracket, but they put them all on the same side, which is kind of curious. Obviously, they don't want another national championship game between 2 Missouri Valley Football Conference teams. Any thoughts about that, Nellie?
Last night on our buddies from Fargo had Patty, I'm going to butcher her name, Viverino on, and she said, I think she believes it was a conscious effort by the committee to put all 5 on one side because you just couldn't do that by accident.
God forbid you'd want the best teams in the division, FCS to get in the championship game. We wouldn't want that. That's crazy. And I'm trying to figure out exactly what was wrong with last year's championship game.
Not a thing. I thought you had the 2
wrong with
best.
the game that went down to the final minute.
And you had the 2 best teams in the country, arguably.
Terrible idea to do that.
It's a tough break for South Dakota State too, having to go out to Montana. I thought that was kind of a really harsh first round matchup for the season they had.
Part of their deal is that last second loss or that season regular season loss to Western Illinois dropped them out of the top 8. Top 8 they would have gotten a bye and they would have been home. And the other problem, so when they fall out of the top 8, they went to the bid process. The problem is their stadium is under renovation. It was done at the end of the regular season. They were bidding to host a game in Sioux Falls at either, I think, the University of Augustana at Sioux Falls or at the University of Sioux Falls. So there's no way they were going to compete in a bid against Montana, who they can bring in 24,000 into their stadium.
Right.
Fantastic.
And I think the stadium that they were trying to bid in held 7,000. So there's no way they could have put a big bid because they would have lost a lot of money by not having but probably the good thing for them is, the bad thing is they got a bad pairing. Good thing is next year their stadium's going to be brand new.
The other interesting one that someone pointed out to me was that Western Illinois going to Dayton, which is Dayton is a non-scholarship.
Pioneer League.
Yeah, Pioneer League, and would
Barely beat Drake.
and in Western Illinois, a 6-5 team with a pretty good record for a 6-5 team, but a 6-5 team nonetheless gets probably as easy a road game as you can get in this format.
Yeah, that's one of the 2 surprises Coach Farley thought. All 5 Valley teams on one side, and he thought Western Illinois getting a game at Dayton.
Yeah, pretty interesting. And pretty unfortunate. We could have arguably, the 5 Missouri Valley teams could be 5 of the 8 best teams in the country, and I think at least 2 of them will play each other head-to-head in the quarterfinals. So if they win this weekend, so that's not a good scenario and a little bit disappointing, especially considering that UNI athletic director Troy Dannon was on the committee. I would have thought he would have been screaming and stomping and kicking his feet and throwing things not to let that happen, to get all 5 of those on that side. But be that as it may, college basketball, Sully, we need to talk a little bit about one of the biggest games that Cedar Falls has ever seen. UNI beat North Carolina on Saturday, shocked the basketball world. I don't know that it shocked us that much. We've seen what Ben Jacobson and his team were capable of in the past.
Pretty boring game there in the McLeod Center. Nothing really happened. Just kind of went as planned. That was an amazing experience, and for a lot of reasons, just to see a team of that reputation and that tradition come in was extraordinary in and of itself. And then the way the game went, when Carolina got up 16, I imagine even the most optimistic of Panther fans had the feel at that point that it's pretty close to over. And I think Ben Jacobson suggested that somewhat the same thought process running through his mind. But to UNI's immense credit, it found a way to get going, to get hot. Some of the more tried and true weapons, the three-point shot, they did a great job there. Washburn went off in the second half, had just a fantastic game, the game of his life, I would think. And I think they did some good things defensively. How much did Carolina miss Marcus Page? Probably quite a bit, but we'll never know exactly how much, if that would have made the difference between winning and losing. And the other thing from Carolina's standpoint was, I don't know exactly why this would have happened this way, but they seemed to get a little bit passive as the game went on.
They did.
UNI's defense would have something to do with that, but early on, Kennedy Meeks was dominating. He had, I think, 6 points in the first couple minutes, and then he finished with 8 for the game. It's like he disappeared. And again, that you credit UNI's defense with that. They did a nice job of mixing up, double teaming, and so on. But a guy that big, if he wants the ball, and he's going to get it, and more often than not, he's going to score.
Yeah, I was surprised. Ted Freeman did a great job there coming in and playing defense.
Yeah.
And I thought Jeremy Morgan did a great job on defense too, and not necessarily man on man, but the fact that you can put him in an area of the court and he can deny passes to a lot of different places because he's so long, he's so quick, and he's so athletic.
That play he made at the end of the game,
Yeah.
incredible.
That's a
That was
perfect
the play of the game,
example.
basically, defensively for you and I. It
Yeah.
was just a huge steal.
Perfect example. I mean, he takes away part of the court just by his presence on that side. So
So it was a
great coaching, great execution by the Panthers, and what an exciting game. They certainly raised the bar now.
Yeah, they get to
what
play.
do they do for an encore?
They get to play Dubuque.
Well, this is for Dubuque. This is like playing North Carolina. So you know that Robbie Sieverding, an ex-Panther, he'll have his Spartans fired up tomorrow night for that game. And they're a pretty good team for a Division III team. They may not have the Division I athletes, but they've got good basketball players, and they play good basketball with Robbie. So.
I tell you, the game was fun for me. As I watched the first half, and I went to get prepared for the UNI football game against Southern Illinois, and then, you know, they're down by 16. I go, okay, well, I can just stay with my preparation. Next thing I knew, it was like 8, and I go, well, I might just walk back over there. And I'm over there for about 30 seconds. I'm in the tunnel, and a couple guys jostle by me, and I look to my left. It's DeAndre Hall and Jameson Whiting. They kind of got over. They kind of skipped out a little bit on pre-game warm-ups, and they caught the end of the game, and they were all sly. Coach Farley knew about it, but.
Well, the other interesting thing there was that before the game, and well, obviously during the game, they're still there. You could see a lot of Carolina blue.
Yeah.
There are a fair amount of Carolina fans there, whether all from the Chapel Hill area or just people who live here now and maintain that loyalty. But by the end of the game, they weren't much of evidence. I'm sure they were there, but the UNI fans kind of took over the gym as well. They should have, and really enjoyed the moment, and that was a lot of fun to see.
Good trade-off. I mean, to get North Carolina to come to Cedar Falls for one game in exchange to play 2 out there, I think is an awesome arrangement for you and I. Hats off to Coach Williams for making that happen. And you know, it's I guess an example on some levels of why big-time power programs like North Carolina don't like to go to a Northern Iowa to play, and they like to play those non-conference schedules on their home court. But great game, and certainly generated some more excitement if there wasn't already enough around UNI basketball and what they're capable of. All of a sudden, 31-4 last year. Okay, that was great, but what can this team do?
Yeah. One quick point on what you just said about Carolina. I think that's true, but in the long run, how much will that hurt them? I suspect not very much. They'll get into the tournament. They'll get a good seed. Their season's all ahead of them. So I think that's something that other Power 5 basketball programs should take note and see that as an example.
I agree. Yeah, in the big picture, it doesn't hurt them one iota. I mean, knocked them out of number 1 for a while. They're still in the top 10.
They'll be fine.
They just won. They beat Northwestern last night in the tournament, so they're right back where they were before. We also have some pretty good basketball being played at Iowa and Iowa State. I think they're both 3-0 now. Iowa State plays Virginia Tech Friday as part of the Emerald Coast Classic in Florida, and the Hawkeyes have a game at Dayton on Thursday. You guys have probably seen a little bit of both of those teams. Your thoughts early?
Iowa, I watched the Marquette game, a lot of it, and they looked great. And they just dominated that game from start to finish. Marquette didn't fire a shot, basically, in a competitive sense. And I understand that this is not by any means one of Marquette's best teams. It certainly isn't. But they turned it on last night and won a fairly big game. So, you know, how much do you make of that victory? I don't know, but I think it certainly bodes well for Iowa that they're on all cylinders. They're playing well early. We'll see where it goes from here.
And I think you can say the same about Iowa State. I mean, they're not playing cupcakes, and they're blowing people out of the gym, basically. And from what little bits and pieces I've seen, they're playing awfully well.
Makes the Big Four Classic more intriguing.
It really should be a great Big Four Classic. All right, guys, we probably should wrap this up. As always, you can follow all the action at www.wcfcourier.com or in our print editions, and we'll be back next week.